Good day. My name is Advaita Stoian, and I was invited to speak at this side event by Soteria International in behalf of the yoga school that I am part of since 25 years. I'm talking about the movement for spiritual integration into the Absolute from Romania. The topic that I will address here is the topic of the conference, and I want to point out a few elements about this topic, the voluntary work as a spiritual practice. Also from the perspective of a practitioner, I started to practice voluntary work as a form of spiritual practice. We know it as karma yoga, a form of yoga that is known for thousands of years. I started to practice since I practically begin the spiritual path, and practicing these elements I have noticed certain mechanisms and also the way in many situations society can misinterpret some of these practices. And we have seen quite a lot of misinterpretation and misdeeds about the voluntary work as a spiritual practice from the side of Romanian authorities in the case of the yoga school M.I.S.A. First of all, of course, for a person who is not familiar with this topic, or a person who is just an administrator or a public worker, it appears the question, why is that almost every spiritual movement in the world is using, sooner or later, or at a certain level of their organization, voluntary work. And here, of course, there appear a lot of speculations, and people tend to throw a lot of judgments from the perspective of a society that is oriented towards putting the individual purpose, the reward for the work, as the only way one can be motivated to act. Now, first of all, we have to understand that a spiritual movement as such, or a spiritual organization, is a gathering of individuals that have evolution or spiritual transformation as a common goal, and usually they use similar methods or practices belonging to a set of spiritual principles in order to produce this effect, this evolution or spiritual transformation. And on the other hand, action is one of the most important tools that we have to shape a character, or to reshape a character in case we want this. Action is the activity that we do in order to learn the most. It was noticed that we learn a lot from what we hear, we learn even more from what we see, but we learn the most from what we do ourselves. With other words, action is an important tool to shape our character. And of course, if we have as a goal to transform ourselves, to better ourselves, we will resort to the most effective tools. Therefore, acting in a certain way is regarded by a spiritual school as a method. It's not just a way to go along with different projects and having low costs. It's first and foremost a spiritual method. Science is providing today a very solid basis for this consideration, for this statement. The kinesthetic stimuli that are associated to action when we do something are linked while we do the action with the emotions or the attitude that we have when we act. And because of that, the strong link that is created between the attitude during the action and the action itself represents later on genuine programs of living or life. And for this reason, it is understandable why acting in a certain way or with a certain attitude could be and becomes, when skillfully used, a very powerful tool for transformation. We can say as a synthesis that the action that we do is transforming the environment, but the attitude during the action is transforming us, is transforming the inner environment. And that's the viewpoint that spiritual schools, spiritual movements were always having towards action. Then, of course, if the attitude is important during the action, what a better attitude we can have than, for instance, working for a higher goal or putting our personal interest aside and subscribe to other higher purposes, to work for a bigger project than our little interest, or to be detached from the immediate outcome or from the rewards that will come from succeeding in a certain action, or even considering ourselves as being a channel in and through which a superior consciousness is acting. All these, they are effective methods in action to shape our character or to help our transformation. So, with other words, associating a superior attitude to certain, even simple actions in the daily life represents a very powerful spiritual practice. And that's the origin of voluntary work, or, for instance, the origin of karma yoga. Of course, the question that appears here is who benefits from the work, or what happens with the fruits of the action. And this is actually where the confusion appears and where actually abuses very often appear from one side or from the other side. The one that is practicing this voluntary work with a spiritual attitude, or karma yoga as it is known in Orient, is already benefiting when doing it. So the problem of the outcome of that action doesn't really exist for that person, because the reward, so to speak, is the benefit that appears when doing an action with a superior attitude. The transformation that appears is the reward. And of course, it is the responsibility of the organization, is the responsibility of the people who coordinate such an activity to give a direction to the fruits of those actions, to the outcome of those actions, in a way that is beneficial for the world, is beneficial for the members of that organization. And at this level, it is just enough, as far as we have noticed in our organization and in other organizations, it is enough a transparency regarding the results. And it is enough for the members to see where are those fruits of their actions going. And then they will be able to decide if they like that direction, they are supporting that direction or not. And if the ones who are coordinating, the ones who are chosen to give a direction to those fruits, are not giving the right direction, this is a subject of an internal debate, but never should be a subject of external debate, because this is only a matter of the organization and not of anyone from outside. Of course, at this level, we have noticed that a correct explanation of the principles that are the foundation of the spiritual voluntary work, if you want, or karma yoga as we know it from the yoga system, to all the members of the organization, will give them the freedom to choose. And then everyone will be able to choose if they want to engage in such a practice or not. And after this when everybody knows what it is about, then of course they will engage or not in the activity out of their free will, and nobody should then interfere with their choice. And at this level we can see that the state or the authorities have an important role to shape the laws according to the principles, the spiritual principles of this voluntary activity. Because, for instance, in order to fulfill the correct attitude, one needs to have a kind of anonymous authorship of the action or the activity. Well, the law is emphasizing only on rewarding individuals, boosting their ego. You did that, you deserve this reward. Well, a person who is trying to act in a completely non-interested way, in a detached manner, of course will need to be given a frame where, being an anonymous worker, still to be protected, to be given even social insurance and so on. And for that, of course, the authority need to understand the principles of such a voluntary work in a spiritual manner and shape the legal frame accordingly. Also, of course, this is not excluding the responsibility of each organization to ensure that the voluntary work is done in safe conditions, in proper working conditions, and so on. That doesn't exclude it. But in many cases, like in the case of the yoga school M.I.S.A from Romania, the voluntary activity is used against the organization. It's practically becoming the weak point of the organization, because in a society that is becoming ego-centered, such a detached activity, detached from the rewards and from the outcome, is easily manipulated, presented to the others as something bad, as a manipulation, or even worse, as human trafficking, as it happened already in Romania with the M.I.S.A yoga school. And in such a situation, of course, we can see not only a misunderstanding of the principles of voluntary work, but an intention to hinder the activity of such a spiritual school using a weak point that is, in this case, a combination between a wrong frame, legal frame, that is not covering the needs of voluntary work, and the fact that for the people in such an organization to develop spiritually, they also need to act in this detached manner, with other words, to practice voluntary work. So the combination between these two gives room for abuses, as already we have seen several times. Therefore, as a conclusion, we can say that the organizations that are using voluntary work should create a kind of a platform where together they will underline the principles that they all agree, because they are fundamental principles, and from the studies we have done, they are found in all religions, in all spiritual practices. And then with these principles to meet with the people in charge with the legal frame and shape the legal frame so that it is correctly covering these activities and is protecting both the organizations using voluntary work and the practitioners of this spiritual practice of the voluntary work from any abuse from the authorities or local authorities or some personal agenda of some politicians. Thank you very much for your attention.